Hi, I'm Skinny Cheeks. This will be my Warden feedback video. So, like the other videos, overall, I think the direction to move skill lines towards tanking, healing, DPS is the opposite of where we should be headed. Instead, within each line should be enticing skills for all three roles, ideally at least 2 of the 3 roles. So the following suggestions are not meant to suggest that these are the exact changes that need to happen, but instead are meant to be ideas to point in the general direction many in the community believe that this should be moving. This is mostly from a PvE perspective. I urge if something's not compatible with PvP, make use of the battle spirit and to monsters features we have available to us already. Scroll down to the Warden section here. All right, so animal companions. The animal companions line is great in PvP, but still falls behind a bit for PvE use. So first off, we have the ultimate here, the bear. These morphs have a weird dynamic right now where Wild Guardian is the stronger offensive morph, yet Eternal gains the bonus execute damage. So there's like, you get some damage here, but you get some other damage here, but really Wild is just better for damage. So just a weird dynamic. I'd recommend moving the additional execute bonus to Wild Guardian and giving the Eternal Guardian more of a support style bonus. This could be an automatic resurrection of an ally with a cooldown or some other group buff. Or instead of the execute damage, it could have an aura it applies that increases damage done or defenses. More supportive morph overall. So we have a more clear distinction between the use cases for the 2 morphs. And then another interesting route to go would be to make one of the morphs, probably Eternal, 1 barrable. It would deal less passive damage, but allow for the use of a separate ultimate on the back bar. Then if we were going this route, you could keep that increased execute damage on the Eternal morph. And so a scenario that could play out would be you use a different ultimate pre-execute, and then once you get into execute, you actually use the active on Eternal Guardian for that extra execute damage. So just some more changes here to differentiate these more. Right now, I don't know. I don't really like the dynamic between the 2 morphs. Then we have Cutting Dive and Cliff Racer. These are the spammables in the line. These both just feel very unsatisfying to cast. They're a bit slow, and they don't really do anything great compared to other skills in the game. Hello, Abby. They're set up as single target spammables, but generally function better as dot or buff abilities. You'll often see Cutting Dive just run as like a 10-second dot, or Cliff Racer just run as a buff to keep up the weapon and spell damage, but not actually used as the main spammables. So what if Cutting Dive had that bleed build up again? So it used to stack up bleeds during off balance. Maybe not as extreme as in the previous version, but stacking higher than it does now, maybe 3 times, but not relying on off balance like the old version. So it could have a shortish duration to incentivize at least semi-spam, like 5 to 6 seconds to keep it up. So you cast it, you put a bleed on them, kind of like the old Carve as well, where if you recast it before the duration is done, then you get like a higher damage version of the bleed. So you could stack it up to 3 times, but a shorter timer on it. So you have to be continuously using this to get that high stacked bleed, to incentivize actually using this as a spammable, or at least the semi-spam. So you could cast it like every 5-6 seconds, whatever timer you ended up going with. And then Screaming Cliff Racer could kind of do something similar, except with the stacking weapon and spell damage instead of needing off balance for that large amount. So maybe 3 or 4 stacks of 100 weapon and spell damage, also on that same kind of short timer. Stacking up and maintaining those stacks would reinforce the spammable playstyle. Could also be interesting to have a morph that sends multiple cliff racers out to enemies in the area. And then we have Fetcher Infection and Growing Swarm. These are really bad right now. Swarm is one of the worst feeling abilities in the game. Used to have a use case with minor vulnerability, but that has been gone for a while. Other options simply handle that better, and the damage from it is very underwhelming. I've never been a fan of the whole every second cast of this ability deals 60% increased damage on Fetcher Infection, which feels like a weird random thing for it to do without a real purpose for it being there. Would love for it to just deal more consistent damage or have an additional purpose within the Animal Companions kit to make it worth running. This is just almost never worth slotting in today's game for DPS. And then Growing Swarm is in even worse shape, as the dot can't even increase in damage. The AoE should be larger and also apply the vuln to all enemies hit with the secondary effect as well. Could also have each of these scale dynamically in cost with your lowest resource, similar to Fulminating Rune for the Arcanist. And then I also really like Nightingale's idea for critical strikes from this ability to apply the hemorrhaging status effect. I thought that would be a nice, interesting, like, secondary effect. If these crit, they apply hemorrhaging. And it kind of ties in with the Warden kit pretty well there with the whole bleed theme from the Animal Companions line. All right, we have Blue Betty and Bullnetch. So I love the addition of the 5% damage done on these. That came a few patches back. Makes it a nice skill to keep up for damage. I've heard some complaints on the PvE end about having a free cleanse. So if that does get addressed, I would like to see a solution that doesn't hurt its use for PvE. Maybe also remove the final cleanse at the 25-second mark and have it changed to 30 seconds for the total duration. It'd be easier to track and fit alongside many other duration skills. So just have it a nice, clean 30-second skill instead of 25. But overall, this is one of the better skills in their kit for sure. You get nice sustain. You get your sorcery and brutality, and you get a good damage buff. So, yeah, this is a good one. Then we have Bird of Prey and Deceptive Predator. So these don't really see any PvE use, sadly. For starters, the slotted effect could be active on both bars for both morphs. So get the Minor Berserk on both bars with Bird of Prey, the Minor Evasion on both bars with Deceptive Predator. Then maybe for Bird of Prey, there could be a bonus damage done to monsters for X seconds when activated. So give you an actual reason to cast this in combat for PvE. For Deceptive Predator, could go the opposite route, a reduced damage taken from monsters for X seconds when activated. So give both of these nice slotted bonuses for both bars, but then also a nice reason to actually activate it for PvE combat. You see these in PvP, so that's why I went with the monsters bonuses. But yeah, as it is now, there's just really not a reason to run these in PvE. So I think it'd be fun to see them get worked into the PvE rotations, because they look cool, and Major Expedition is nice to have, so having some other reason to cast these. So overall, the passives are pretty decent all around in Animal Companions, but neither those nor the active skills offer any reason for a support role to want to take this line. So, you know, there's no support morph for the bear ultimate. There's no, you know, other than, I didn't even talk about the Shulks, because I think those are great for PvE and PvP. I don't really think they need much. Other than the Major Minor Breach on Shulks, there's just not really anything supportive in this line. So having a morph of the bear, or something else in one of these skills that like this used to be a nice support skill, Fetcher Infection, but now Minor Vuln is, you get it other places, and it's way more efficient to get it that way. So working some stuff like that back into the kit for support roles. And then for a damage dealer, the crit damage bonuses are nice in this line, but it's not enough to bring this line up to match some of the other better performing DPS options. It's a solid line, but it's still lagging a bit behind some of the other top performing ones right now. I really liked Nightingale's idea for the Savage Beast passive. So he kept the ultimate part, which is what it is now. It's only the ultimate part. But then on the second part, it said hemorrhaging now stacks up to 4 times. So how hemorrhaging works now is at 1 stack, it's about 75% of the damage of burning. At 2 stacks, it's about even with burning for the damage. And then at 3 stacks, it's about 25% stronger than burning. So essentially, this would make it 50% stronger than burning for the ticks. And then hemorrhaging stacks applied by animal companions abilities count as 2 stacks. So you could just build it super quick. The only issue I see with this is that some morphs don't play into bleeds as well. So maybe something with hemorrhaging if your stamina is higher. So have like a conditional passive. Like if your stamina is higher than your magicka, then you have that hemorrhaging passive here, but maybe some kind of buff to magic damage if your magic is higher. But overall, they need something else in the kit to be competitive for PvE damage. All right, then we have Green Balance. This one's going to be a doozy, so hear me out. I love what this offers for healing, but what if we took a lot of the morphs and consolidated them? Typically, there are just preferred morphs being used for healing anyways, so we could take the best of both and put them on one morph. Then we could work in some damage here. I think Druid Nature Magic type, Druid Nature Magic type stuff, or the Telvanni Mycoturges. This would really fit the theme of the line, and we don't have to take stuff away from the healers to get there. I know Green Balance might sound like it should be healing only to some ESO players. I've heard this feedback, but Green Balance is a healing thing. But I think that's just because that's what we're used to. In fantasy settings, nature magic for damage is absolutely a thing. So, starting off with the ultimate, we could merge these 2 morphs. So Healing Thicket not only has the healing for 4 seconds after leaving the forest, but also does the 20 ultimate if it's used on a friendly target under 50% health. So just essentially consolidate the 2 morphs as they are now onto Healing Thicket, and then the Enchanted Forest morph could be a damage ultimate instead. Or even if it didn't actually deal damage, it could put a strong debuff on enemies that works for damage, either just for you or for the group. Could also provide a nice offensive buff like Major Berserk or maybe something unique. So there's lots of routes Enchanted Forest could go as a damage ultimate. I also like this idea from Tristane Ashfield. Something like this: Poisonous Thicket, swell a forest at the target location instantly, dealing 38 poison damage and applying the poison status effect to enemies within 6 meters. The forest continues to deal 928 poison damage in the area every 1 second for 6 seconds and snares enemies. So almost like a little Destra ult, but weaker and cheaper. So I think this costs what, like 90 ultimate or something? So like a mini poison version of that. Right now it's just, we have this on a lot of skills in the game right now where the 2 morphs don't really feel that different, and we really have some space here to put in some fun creative things. And I think Enchanted Forest being a damage ultimate would be really cool. All right, for Enchanted Growth and Soothing Spores, this is another easily mergeable skill. Soothing Spores could give both the 15% increased heal and minor intellect and endurance. Then these both morphs could dynamically cost similar to the Arcanist heals and cost your highest resource instead of separating the resource cost by morph. So right now, one costs Magicka, one costs Stamina. You could just make them dynamically cost whatever your highest resource is. And then Enchanted Growth could be a damage skill instead, maybe some type of AoE burst, either spammable or delayed, or even a 4 to 8 second dot that grows in damage quickly each second over a short duration. A lot of directions you could go there too. Then for Budding Seeds, this one's already pretty well split, I think, in the morphs. As one is like more debuff oriented. So you could keep Corrupting Pollen like that, but have it place a damage over time for 6 seconds with a bigger burst of damage at the end of the effect. This could keep the debuffs currently present on the skill, or at least have the Minor Cowardice still there. And then Budding could have like the reverse buff, like Minor Courage on it for your allies. So Budding Seeds, Minor Courage, Corrupting Pollen, Minor Cowardice. Budding Seeds would be the heal. Corrupting Pollen would be the damaging skill. I think that the theme of those two contrasting that way would work really well. And then we have Leeching Vines in Living Trellis. We could put the Minor Lifesteal on Living Trellis as well. So that's what Leeching Vines has. So consolidate that over. And then turn Leeching Vines into a damage morph. Could apply a dot on enemies for 10 to 20 seconds that heals you for 1% of the damage done. Still fit in with that whole leeching theme. Poison damage seems the most thematic here. Could also possibly do a short immobilize, would fit in with that vine aspect. Then we have Green Lotus and Lotus Blossom. These could also be easily converted to healing versus damage morphs. Could leave Green Lotus mostly as is, but make the Prophecy and Savagery active on both bars at all times and increase the duration to 30 seconds. So that's the morph here that has the higher heal for both the light attacks and the heavy attacks. So bump that up to 30 seconds and then have Prophecy and Savagery always active when slotted. And then for Lotus Blossom, this was another, I think, Tristane, the one that submitted this ultimate. I think he submitted this one as well. Embrace the Lotus Blessing, causing your light attacks to deal an additional poison damage, and your fully charged heavy attacks to deal additional poison damage for 20 seconds. While slotted on either bar, you gain Major Prophecy and Savagery, increasing your spell and weapon critical rating by 26-29. Could also adjust the values to do this as a 30-second skill or a 60-second skill or the 20-second skill, whatever. Adjust accordingly, but have it just buff your light and heavy attacks, essentially with additional poison damage. And then for Bursting Vines and Nature's Embrace, for this one, could move the upfront burst heal onto Nature's Embrace so it has a burst and heal over time. Could potentially move the larger ult gain there too, but probably not even necessary. And then for Bursting Vines, this was also Tristane Tristane submitted this one too. I thought it was pretty interesting. Launch a vine to swing yourself to your foe, instantly dealing poison damage to them and enemies within 6 meters. Enemies hit take an additional X poison damage over 5 seconds. An ally near the vines can activate the burst synergy, dealing 28-12 poison damage to all effective enemies. So this one, it's probably a bit too similar to how Burning Talons works. It's pretty much the same idea there, but something in that general realm would be good with this skill, I think. And then we have the passives. So right now, this passive is just Major Mending when you heal yourself or an ally under 40% health. So in addition to what's already there, could also have when you deal damage with the green balance ability to an enemy under 40% health, you apply Nature's Fury to them for 4 seconds, increasing their damage taken from you by 12%. So this wouldn't kick in until under 40% health, but would be a nice bit of damage towards that, the last 40% of a fight against the enemy. And it would be pretty easy to keep up, as any kind of green balance ability damage on them would keep that up. So just to be clear, this wouldn't replace the current passive. It would just have 2 parts to it. So have the heal part when you heal under 40% health, and then the damage part when you damage under 40% health. And then for Nature's Gift, this one, when you heal an ally with the green balance ability, you gain 277 magic or stamina, whichever resource pool is lower. So this could just change to when you heal or deal damage with a green balance ability, so that it works for both of those. And then for Emerald Moss, increases your healing done with green balance abilities by 5% for each green balance ability slotted. So this could be changed to increases your healing and damage done by 2% for each green balance ability slotted on either bar. So this would be a lower value for that healing part, but apply to all heals instead of just the green balance heals only. And it would be active on both bars. So if your skills are split on your 2 bars a bit, you could potentially get closer to what you had with that 5% there, but for all your heals or for all your damage instead of only for green balance abilities. So something along those lines. But overall, I think the green balance line would be so cool to consolidate these morphs and have some proper damage skills. I think a lot of players would really enjoy that theme. All right, next up we have Winter's Embrace. So this is actually one of my favorite lines in the game right now, because I think it does what most skill lines should be doing. Needs a little bit of love for damage still, but Winter's Embrace is a great example of where skill lines could be. So it's good for support, but it's also pretty good for damage too. So starting off with the ultimate, Northern Storm and Permafrost. So these have another kind of weird dynamic between them, where Permafrost has the guaranteed chilled, which does a lot of damage, but then Northern Storm is like the damage morph of it. So, but in that one doesn't have the guaranteed chilled. So there's kind of a weird split between the 2 morphs. So we could remove the major protection from Northern Storm, give the dot and increase to 12 seconds instead of 8 seconds, and then add in the guaranteed chilled damage that's now on Permafrost. We'll move that to Northern Storm. So take off the defenses, add on the offenses, and then the stacks could come down to 6. So right now it goes up to 9 stacks, which gives you 18% increased damage. So bring the stacks down to 6 for 12% damage done instead of 18, because with the extra chill damage and extra time on the ult, it's already going to be really strong. So it doesn't need it doesn't probably need to keep that 18%. So that would last for 8 seconds after the ultimate ends. So it would still end up at 20 seconds like it is now. Right now it lasts for 8 seconds, and then you have 12 seconds of a damage done buff. So with this way, it would last for 12 seconds, and you'd have 8 seconds of the damage done buff after. But yeah, it would give the same overall duration, but with a bit more power in the dot itself and removing the defensive power. And then we could remove the guaranteed chill damage from Permafrost and add in Major Brittle instead. Would solidify it as a more support morph, since everyone would benefit from this, but your personal damage would not be as high. Might need the cost increase or the duration shortened with Major Brittle, because it would have Major Protection and Major Brittle on this morph, but it would not won't be doing hardly any damage at all because the dot on it is really low and it wouldn't have the guaranteed shield anymore. But I think that would split the dynamic between these two ultimates a little bit better and have one as more like a clearly supportive morph and the other as like a personal damage morph. Let's see. So for Frostcloak, this is another one we could consolidate the morphs on to get something else interesting put into this line. So Ice Fortress right now gives you minor protection, but the radius on it is small, whereas Expansive Frostcloak ups it to 36 meter radius for the major and minor resolve, or sorry, for the major resolve. So it could move the extra radius onto Ice Fortress, give that the 36 meter radius for major resolve, along with the minor protection benefit for you that it already offers. And then that would free up Expansive Frostcloak to be renamed and converted into a damage ability. This could be a damage buff or even completely change the way it functions, like in Nightingale's suggestion here. So he made this skill Rhyme Strike, essentially a frost melee spammable. So it deals strike an enemy with a jagged shard of ice, dealing frost damage. This ability deals 25% more damage to enemies afflicted by the chilled status effect. Casting Rhyme Strike wraps a thick cloak of... Sorry, I can't read. Casting Rhyme Strike wraps a thick cloak of ice around you and your grouped allies. The ice grants major resolve, increasing your physical and spell resistance by 59.48 for 20 seconds. So this would have the small radius major resolve still, but on a spammable for a damage dealer. Again, just more differentiating with the morphs here, because right now it's just like they essentially do the same thing. One's just a bigger area, one gives you minor protection. So I feel like this is really these morphs are really an area where we can tackle getting some more diversity into the game and really giving more tools for specific playstyles. Because yeah, there's no reason why Ice Fortress couldn't just have the extended range, and then that leaves Expansive open to do whatever you want with, really. All right, then we have Gripping Shards and Winter's Revenge. So Gripping Shards is a bit underwhelming. This is the tank morph here. Maybe if it also had Major Breach and a larger radius, it could be squeezed into setups. So this doesn't immobilize, and then the damage on it scales with your max health. In Winter's Revenge, this one's pretty decent for damage, especially with the increased chilled status effect. But the condition is weird. Damage increases by 30% if cast with the Destruction Staff equipped. Never really been a huge fan of that one. So maybe the condition be changed away from casting with a staff to either standing inside of it or just added to the base ability. Something that doesn't require you to have a staff equipped to get that bonus. The duration going up to 15 seconds would also be nice. I think across the board, having ground cast abilities base durations up to 15 seconds so you don't have to cast the clunkiness as often. That would be nice. And then could or fix the clunkiness of ground cast abilities, but I don't know. That might be a deeper problem to dive into. Could also have both morphs just scale with your health or your offensive stats, whichever would be higher, instead of separating that function by morph. So both morphs you could use and they'd scale with whichever stats are higher. All right, then we have Arctic Blast and Polar Wind. The only real complaint is Arctic Blast losing the heal if enemies are hit. I think they could bring that back. It already heals much less than Polar Wind, and it has no heal over time. Polar Wind is really good at what it does. This is a much smaller heal on Arctic Blast. I think if they brought that back, these two would be in pretty good shape with each other. Then we have Crystallized Slab and Shimmering Shield. These feel a bit niche in their current forms, especially for PvE. It'd be nice to see them updated. I will be honest though, I was having a tough time. We were working on these in one of my previous live streams, trying to come up with some solutions here. I was having a tough time. So these might need some more brainstorming. This is just some possible ideas, but right now they do feel a bit too niche. Excuse me. For Crystallized Slab, possibly remove the stun and allow the absorption to work on all direct damage instead of just projectiles. Or maybe have it as a true reflect for the first 0.5 seconds to act as a parry. So if you hit this within half a second before the projectile hits you, it actually will reflect it back instead of just sending like the low hit frost damage like it does right now. Could leave the projectile portion for the frost damage as well if you didn't have this like parry part to it, and it just worked on all direct damage, but for projectiles it could still reflect the frost damage. And then for Shimmering Shield, possibly change that to all direct damage as well. Could be a steadier alternative to Trample for major heroism. Could leave the projectile portion for the extra ult as well. But yeah, I don't know. These seem like a handful to work on and get to a good spot without them being too strong because of what they offer. But yeah, it would be nice to see these get used a little bit more. And then we have Frozen Device, Frozen Retreat. This is another skill where we could consolidate morphs and have a proper damage ability. Here's some more suggestions from Nightingale. So he changed it to Frozen Retreat and Frost Rune. So moving the stuff off of Frozen Device onto Frozen Retreat. So Frozen Retreat would take on the Frozen Device debuff, which was Major Maim, though I think I'd prefer Major Cowardice over Major Maim since Major Maim is in their passives already. So I think Major Cowardice might make a little more sense. Then the other morph could be converted to a proper damage ability like Frost Rune shown here. So summon an Ancient Frost Rune which arms after 1.5 seconds. When triggered, the enemy is dealt 1799 frost damage and is marked with a frozen curse for 10 seconds. Applying the chilled status effect to the target afflicted with the frozen curse applies a stack of shatter, increasing their damage taken from your frost abilities by 2%. At 5 stacks, the shatter detonates, dealing 2399 frost damage to the target and all other nearby enemies. This effect deals 100% more damage to enemies below 25% health. So, like a delayed burst, but also a debuff for frost attacks all in one. Would be a really fun addition to the Frosty kit here. And the thing with all these consolidations is you don't actually lose anything because you're just moving one of the debuff off of Frozen Device onto Frozen Retreat. So those that liked Frozen Device, like, you're not actually losing anything. You're only gaining something because now Frozen Retreat has what you used and more. So the consolidation, I think, would be a really good approach for adding in new stuff. Like, the problem with some of the stuff in the past is they didn't really properly consolidate morphs before they completely changed one up. So then people end up in a position where they feel like, oh, well, I liked that other morph. Like with Blast Bones. You know, a lot of people really liked the flame morph of that. And while the blighted morph is still good for damage, people didn't like just losing the flame morph. So like with blighted, for example, They could have made it to where if your stamina is higher, you get the disease version. If your magicka is higher, you get a flame version, and consolidated that down to one morph. You have the best of both worlds there, and then you have that second morph. They can do whatever they want with it. Nobody's losing anything, right? So I think going forward, that would be the much better way to handle adding in new abilities on these morphs. All right, then we have the passives. So Icy Aura. So this passive's a little weird. This is the one that gives major maim when someone attacks you in melee range. They build stacks on themselves that end up giving them major maim. It's kind of an odd way to source that. Too many conditions take up limited passives. Yeah, so we only have so many passives per line. So this one just has a bunch of weird conditions to it. So something more universal for a variety of builds I think would just be better overall here. And we have major maim here on this rune anyways. You could just make that to where you don't need to be teleported for it. I don't know. This passive's just kind of felt weird to me since they introduced it. So I'd like to see something a little bit better with Icy Aura. Piercing Cold, we have the block damage by 8%, frost damage by 15. So bump the frost damage up to 16 to match the 8 and 8% suggestions from other damage passives. So we were talking about like the Sorcerer's passive that gives physical and shock, make those 8% each. The Decades with flame and poison, make those 8% each. So this one could just be like 16% to frost damage. Of course, that can always be adjusted down the line if frost ends up better and that ends up too much. But right now it's not the case, so why not? And then final note here for frozen armor. Be nice to have this passive apply more consistently rather than only on a single bar for the ability slotted. So either just like some kind of flat buff or maybe an increase for each winner's embrace ability slotted on either bar. So those can stack together a bit, even if it was slightly lower. Because right now you can end up in some weird scenarios where these skills are kind of stacked on one bar and you just end up really imbalanced there. So something to have it apply a little bit more consistently would be nice. That wraps up the Warden. Honestly, I think Winter's Embrace it's in pretty good shape already. They just need a little bit of love to make it a little bit better for damage. It's already pretty good for support, but then having green balance, having that as a cracked DPS line would be so cool. And then animal companions getting some love throughout for sure. But yeah, that wraps up the Warden. We'll be back for more of these in the future. See you on the next one.